Almost 2 years ago, I actually stumbled upon an article about a scientist at UC Irvine who was doing a study using stem cells to treat Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Frank LaFurla had successfully treated Alzheimer's in mice and had just received a very large grant from this place called CERM in the state of California. And they were going to explore further this method that he was testing. And I was truly fascinated about this work. Unfortunately, Alzheimer's has been a part of my life as long as I can remember. My grandfather had it while I was young, and most of my memories of him are how the disease affected him in perhaps the funnier or lighter ways. As a 6-year-old, I got a real kick out of him taking his teeth out at restaurants, telling the same jokes and stories over and over again, and singing the same Hebrew songs to me over and over again. To me, that was Grandpa Marty, just a happy guy who did the same funny things all the time. When I was at his funeral, when I was 12 years old, I remember picturing his smile and that thing he did with his hands where you clap your hands together and do this all the time. He would do this all the time, and as a little girl, it made me laugh. I would say the Alzheimer's shield was lifted a bit more when just 3 years after we lost my grandfather, my grandma Edie, who had cared for my grandfather, started to show signs of dementia. This time, it didn't seem quite as funny. I was a bit older, and I started to notice that the family matriarch, who always seemed so in control, so smart, so busy doing crossword puzzles, started to slip away, and it was much more difficult to ignore. She was eating less, rarely going out, repeating things. When I was 16, my mom and uncle moved her to a nursing home near our house, and I got a front row seat to losing her to the cruel world of dementia. The doctors always flip-flop back and forth with her diagnosis between Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget the moment that I had to show her how to put on a seatbelt when I took her for a drive after just getting my license. And I'll definitely never forget how soon after that she stopped talking, stopped walking, and eventually curled up in a ball and stayed that way for the last many months of her life. I would visit her many Fridays after school and talk to her about the silly dramas of my teenage life. I would work my hand into her tight little fist and just hold her hand if I could, but never being able to really sit for her for that long because it was just too sad. During that time, my mom dedicated herself to caring for her own mother. I remember being with her. She bought high-calorie shakes for my grandmother because she could no longer chew. And I remember being with her as she bought diapers for her own mother, an experience she described as extremely painful. I remember her telling me how hard it was for her, and I'll never forget the moment when we were both standing next to the shell that had become my grandmother. And my mom told me that if this ever happened to her, to just smother her with a pillow. I wish I didn't, but I think of that moment often these days. This month marks 9 years since my mom was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease at only 55 years old. This was barely 7 years after we lost my grandma. I first noticed it the weekend of my college graduation. She told me the same story a few times, and deep down inside, I was devastated. I said nothing to anyone. Maybe if I pretended it didn't happen, it wouldn't be real. Maybe it was a one-time thing and it would just go away. Of course, it didn't go away. The repetition of stories happened more and more. Every time I visited, it seemed like more and more of her slipped away. As she wiped countertops over and over again, began wandering aimlessly, and became pretty confused about reality. Like the time she walked up to me around 5 years ago while I was having breakfast and said, "I'm George, right?" My mom's name is Adele, definitely not George. In the early years of her diagnosis, I spent hours upon hours online searching for a miracle cure for this disease. I was sure that there was something out there, perhaps at the very end of the internet, that would treat this nightmare that was taking my mom away from me just as we were getting to know each other as grown-ups. But as you can imagine, I did not find that miracle cure. Because as you know, there is currently no cure or even effective treatment for Alzheimer's disease. In fact, among the top 10 causes of death, Alzheimer's is the only one that cannot be prevented, slowed, or cured. We, of course, enrolled my mom in a few clinical trials, but nothing seemed to slow down the train that she was on. Occasionally, we'd hear about some drug that was meant to treat something else, suddenly slowing the effects of Alzheimer's, and we'd rush to get it for her. We were so very desperate to help my mom that some of these drugs hadn't even been properly tested for Alzheimer's patients, but we tried them anyway. Of course, nothing helped. As time went on, I myself became pretty dark and quite angry. I felt so very alone. This wasn't supposed to be happening to me in my 20s and my mom in her 50s. I kept telling myself the same sad story over and over again, how it was just all so hopeless, how I was so powerless, and how it was so truly unfair that I was being gypped out of the relationship I so deserved to have with my mom. I lived in that space for a while, quite a while. But then around 4 years ago, all of that began to change. A dear friend came to me with an idea to do a variety show and said it could benefit Alzheimer's. I was shocked and overwhelmed, and I initially said, no, thank you, I don't really want to do that. But after some very friendly convincing on his part, I gave in. And we made plans to put on a variety show a few months later, and we decided to call it Hilarity for Charity. The first event was amazing, but even more amazing, excuse me, was how slowly but surely I began being contacted by young people all over the country, thanking me and my very funny husband for sharing our story. Turns out they all thought they were alone too, but we weren't. Eventually, the mission became clear. Hilarity for Charity's goal was to raise awareness of Alzheimer's disease among young people and to support those who are going through it. In just 3.5 years since our first event, Hilarity for Charity has raised almost $3 million, which we've begun to use in many wonderful ways. Of course, some of those ways have been through helping to fund research and studies that are particularly related to early onset Alzheimer's and early detection of Alzheimer's. However, we realize that our money and time is best spent supporting those who are dealing with this nightmarish disease on a daily basis. In January, we launched a partnership, which I'm so very proud of, with Home Instead Senior Care to give grants for at-home care for those who need it the most and who can afford it the least. In only 6 months, we have given away over 8,000 hours in free at-home care. About 2 months ago, we received a note from one of our recipients. He said, "The words thank you just don't seem to be enough to express my heartfelt appreciation. I have barely been out of Sue's sight since 2006. Our world has shrunk to the size of her bedroom and bath, with conversation from babbling to hysteria. Please accept my total gratitude for the chance to join humanity again." We've been shooting a documentary for over a year now called This is Alzheimer's, which takes a look at how Alzheimer's has affected my family, how it affects those who live in a nursing home, and most shockingly, how it has affected and truly changed the lives of the Dodson family in Michigan when Ken Dodson was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at only 30 years old. We've created an online video chat support group for people under 40 in time zones across the country so that they can connect with other people when they're too busy working, starting their careers, growing their careers, or having young children. So it's not hard to meet other people who understand how it feels when your loved one stops answering to mom, so you have to start calling her Adele. We've given a voice to young Alzheimer's advocates all around the country with our program HFCU, in which we support college students to throw their own Alzheimer's events by providing them with a toolkit and materials and other support they might need to make their event great. To show you a bit more about Hilarity for Charity, I have a little highlight reel of some of our work. You can play the video now.
It's going to be a wonderful night.
What the fuck are you guys doing here?
Seth.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tenacious D!
Is that the most fun Alzheimer's video you've ever seen? So about 2 years ago, about a week after I had read the article about Frank LaFurla's study, I was presented with a unique opportunity to further my reach to support the people going through this disease that actually was going to bring me up close and personal and eventually right to Dr. LaFurla's lab down in Irvine. When Maria Shriver calls, you answer. And answer I did. It seemed that Lisa Gibbons, the longtime, wonderful human being and Alzheimer's patient advocate to the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine, was stepping down, and they were looking for a replacement. Honestly, I wasn't sure I had even heard of CIRM before a week ago, and now suddenly I was presented with the huge honor of becoming a part of it. Between us, I always struggled to follow anything in a biology book, and you better believe that I wanted to join this groundbreaking group who's funding the exact type of research that I believe Alzheimer's needs. In the year and a half or so that I've sat on CIRM's board, I've struggled to understand the terminology, and I've definitely felt like I'm back in science class, a place that I never belonged. But mostly, it's been fascinating to learn about this groundbreaking and innovative science. And the true honor has been representing those who are affected by Alzheimer's to advocate for more studies, more research, more ways to finally find a treatment or cure for Alzheimer's to make that leap from mouse to human. Being a part of CIRM gives me hope that with the work we are doing here and the work that you guys will do one day and do now, that all of these people who are alone, who are hopeless, who are spending their days searching for a cure at the end of the internet just might find it one day. Thank you.